Right, hello and welcome to another episode of Deep Dive with the Rhode Island Coalition for Israel, or RICI for short. We are a grassroots nonprofit working to combat anti Semitism or Jew hatred, educate about Israel, and strengthen the alliance between the US and Israel. This podcast is focusing on issues shaping Israel, America, Rhode Island, and the future of Western civilization at large. It's hosted by me, Maria Friedman, the executive director of RICI, and our aim of this podcast is to bring clarity to complex topics so that our viewers have the knowledge and confidence to engage in informed discussions. In order to do that, we also have to challenge false narratives and provide historical, moral, and strategic context. So I couldn't think of a better guest to invite on that front, and that is Laureen Lipsky. She is the CEO and founder of Taking Back the Narrative, which is a Zionism education company. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Maria. I'm so honored. And I know that you were on the TBTN podcast earlier this week, and I have told no less than 10 people about RICI since you were on. I'm highly impressed, even more so than I knew about RICI beforehand. So thank you.
Amazing. No, thank you. It's a really a privilege to have you on today, and I'm so excited to deep dive into this podcast with you. And so tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background. How did you become a Zionist? How did you even come to Zionism?
Sure. So it's definitely not your typical story. I am a first generation proud American. My parents came over from the former USSR. So I did not even know that I was a Jew until I was about 7 years old. I was watching Lassie, a very old school TV show, where the protagonist was this blonde Christian boy and he would pray to Jesus every night before bed. I did the same. 7-year-olds are mighty impressionable. So I did the same for a couple of weeks. My dad walked by my room and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, praying to Jesus." And he said, "We need to have a talk. We are Jews." Thrilled to have found out that information. I wanted to attend Hebrew school like all my other Judean friends. I was not allowed to because the rabbi was deemed too liberal in our town by my father, who told me under no certain terms am I sending you to him because we did not escape communism for you to be indoctrinated. Still felt very connected to the culture. I did not know anything about Israel at that point. Um, and so was begging for Hebrew school lessons, something to do with a bat mitzvah. And my parents said, "Okay, well, we'll do you one better. We're going to go to Israel for your bat mitzvah, and you'll have a transliterated bat mitzvah up on the Masada." So I had a great trip. First time out of the country was to Israel. I knew that there was something special about Israel, but no one was explaining that our people are indigenous to the land, none of that, or even that we are an ethnicity, right? Just like, okay, well, we went to Israel. This is our special land, and then on with the rest of the trip. So I came back home, couldn't stop talking about the trip to everyone. And then within a year, I started being highly critical of Israel because of the media. So I'm watching in the media how everyone is mad at Israel for something called settlements. Those are legal Judean communities. Apparently, Jews stole land from the Arabs. Apparently, all the Jews left Israel for 2,000 years, and on and on and on. So, those now I know that obviously that they're lies. Those mistruths became my basically dogma when talking about Israel, when asked in conversation by people who were not anti-Semitic. They simply were curious. And so they would turn to me, their token Judean friend, and with good reason would say, "Oh, Israel's in the news. What's going on?" And I would reply with, "Now I have obviously no misinformation." So this went on for close to 20 years. I had my aha moment of Zionism in 2014. This was during the first official Hamas war against Israel. I was watching CNN after work. They gave airtime to Hamas terrorists and no airtime to IDF generals or any member of the Israeli politicians or anything of that sort. And so I knew that something was not adding up. wanted to find out more about Israel, more about the Middle East, did a lot of deep dive through some groups online that back then were actually very scarce, but they were accurate, unlike today. And the little that I was learning back then, I would share to my networks. And that's how it all snowballed from a little bit of information to something that I was focusing in on daily. And then that became a career in op-ed writing, which then turned into launching Taking Back the Narrative in the beginning of 2022.
Wow, that's an incredible journey. And I think it's also very humble of you to recognize that you were misinformed, right? Like, I definitely was misinformed, probably more uninformed as well, too, growing up, because I really didn't know anything about Jewish history or the history of Israel, and obviously the Jews' connection to our homeland. I wasn't exposed to any of that education, and I didn't really have a reason to seek it out growing up. And so I think it's amazing that you can recognize that. And obviously, you've taken things into your own hands to try and educate this next generation. So, can you talk about? I love your definition of Zionism. What are people getting wrong about the definition of Zionism? And also, why is your company called, Taking Back the Narrative, a Zionism education company?
Absolutely. So first, I just want to supplement what you were saying, that it is no fault of your own that you and many, many others, right, did not know as much about Israel. It just simply not taught widely in our communities, not through a lot of the organizations, not even through Hebrew school. Hebrew schools focus, I mean, for good or for bad, on the faith aspect of our culture, which is very important. We need our faith, right? Like there is no, well, we have a history without our faith, but our faith is foundational to our culture. That's something I
Yeah.
really want to establish. But our institutions, our Hebrew schools, our Judean day schools, they don't focus on our actual history fully. So where are we, what are we left with? Where are we supposed to find this information? And it's fine if there was no anti-Semitism. Okay, we can go through life, not knowing what we don't know. But with the rampant anti-Semitism before the Judean genocide on October 7th, especially highlighted afterwards, that lack of information is what is actually fueling more and more Jew hatred, right? So it's hand in hand, right? Like the more we try to fight something that is diabolically evil, Jew hatred, right? It's a virus that has been
Mhm.
metastasizing for over 2,000 years since the advent of Christianity. There was no anti-Semitism before then. We're eating in it, just like I did, for 20 years. It wasn't something purposeful that I was doing, but unbeknownst to me, I was, right? So I'm so sorry. Can you repeat what you said about why TBTN, right? Like why the name?
Yeah, like
Oh, the
I'm curious
definition, the
about the
definition.
name and why you also call it Zionism Education Company instead of Zionist. I know
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
made that distinction. I'm just curious
Sorry.
about that.
Yeah, so I remember what you said now. So you were saying my definition. So it's not my definition of Zionism, it is the definition. It's the only accurate definition of Zionism. So a lot of people get wrong is, and me too, for decades, the definition of Zionism is not a safe place for Jews. It is not a state for Jews because those definitions do not uphold the indigeneity of our homeland, of us to the homeland. So the actual definition of Zionism is the following. The right, and it's very simple, couldn't be more simple. The right of the indigenous Judean people to live in full sovereignty and full rights in the Judean homeland. It's one sentence and it encompasses who we are. We're an indigenous population. Does not mean that we were the only people who ever lived in Israel. That's not true, right? But we're indigenous to Israel. That's our homeland. And we have full historical rights to live there without oppression, without occupation. That is it.
That's amazing. I just want to stop there for a second. I wish, first of all, that every Jewish young person in the world could be taught that exactly how you just said it. digest it because it's so important and critical. If somebody had told me that when I was younger, I could have gotten a head start and I
Right.
would have been able to understand this connection that we have to Israel and why it's so important. I only found that out later in life. I did Birthright and other trips to Israel where I found that out, thank God. But I wish somebody could have grabbed me by the hand and said, like, hey, this is the definition of Zionism, and not just for Jewish people. I wish the whole world could really understand that definition. And I think also what's key about that is you never said anything about the right to defend itself, because that should just be a given that every country and every people has the right to defend themselves when they're under existential threat. That just is a given, but that doesn't need to be in the definition of our peoplehood and our connection to the land. That's just what we're doing, obviously, to survive. So just want to point that out that that's not in there because I see videos all the time saying, oh, it's the right of Israel to defend itself, but that doesn't actually encapsulate the real definition. So thank you for that. So taking back the narrative, yes, tell me more about that name, how you formed it, and why you call it a Zionism education company.
So before we address that, I do want to add more information to the numerous inaccurate definitions of Zionism and why they're just swimming around in the universe. So we unfortunately have to thank Herzl for much of that misinformation and why there was a schism between Herzl and Jabotinsky at the last Zionism conference. So Herzl was wanting Jews to leave Europe for Palestine, which it was the colonizer term for Israel from 136 AD to 1948. Jews and only Jews in Palestine were called Palestinians. Arab occupiers were not. So my own great grandfather was I'm sorry, my own great uncle was called a Palestinian when he
Mm,
arrived to Palestine during the war in 1936. Of course, thanks to the British occupation, his boat, many other boats were detained. They
mm,
were placed in detention camps. So that's a whole separate conversation we can touch upon later. But the point is that so Herzl wanted Jews to leave Europe only due to anti-Semitism,
mm,
right? Jabotinsky was saying that's not accurate. Of course, anti-Semitism is a problem, right? Like there was a wave of pogroms. You and I are Russian Jews. We know all too well through our family history about that. But he was saying that's no reason to leave for Palestine. We leave for Palestine because that is our homeland.
mm,
We're not escaping to Israel because we're fleeing something. Of course, again, that's fine to have that be a reason, right? But we're not seeking out to return home or to this random piece of land, as
mhm.
Herzl was essentially insinuating, right? And so then, speaking of Russian Jews, I'm very proud of when I learned this a couple years ago that it was the Russian delegation, the Russian Jewish delegation to the Zionist Congress that saved basically and it's not a Zionism movement because Zionism has been part and parcel of the Judean culture for 4,000 years. But in that era, it saved Zionism because I'm sure you know this. Herzl, but maybe the listening audience might not.
Mhm.
Herzl was so desperate for Jews to have a safe space that he wanted to send an expeditionary force to Uganda. What does Uganda have to do with Jews
Right.
at all, right? So wanted to send an expeditionary force to Uganda. They had some free land there, make a deal with the Ugandan government. We'll just place a bunch of Jews there, right? Like for safekeeping. And Jabotinsky and his camp were absolutely livid, along with the Russian Jews. They threatened to leave the Congress altogether, and they saved the Zionism Congress. And they said, that's not our homeland. What are you doing? Your theory is completely
Mm,
anti-Zionist,
right.
right? Because if we're not talking about Israel returning home, and this was nothing novel, right? There were Judean groups, diaspora groups returning back home throughout our entire exile period.
Right.
Did not start in the 1800s. The Sephardim were returning en masse after the Second Inquisition, after the 15th century. Before then, there were Egyptian Jews and Balkan Jews, and Italian Jews and Greek Jews and laundry list. Name a country where Jews were flung off in the diaspora, whether by choice, as merchants, as traders, or not by choice, right? Much later on through slavery, through exile, there was no restriction on Jews to come back home until 1882. That's when the Ottoman Empire shut down the border. Not before
Mhm.
then. Jews were, like how we have we go to Israel for Pesach, or we go to Israel
Mhm.
for whatever holiday. That's what Jews were doing for thousands of years. Jews
Right.
would be living in Italy, in England, again, like name a country, in Tunisia. And if they felt like celebrating Hanukkah in Israel and they can get there, right? Like if they lived close enough, they walked. If they needed to take a boat, whatever mode of transportation, no one stopped them, right? So that's something also, like it was not all negative. It was not just some fortress blocking Jews until much later in modern history. So to touch upon why taking back the narrative. So every single post that I was sharing with my networks, every little fact that I was learning, I would end with hashtag. Remember hashtags?
Mhm. Yes.
I feel so elderly saying hashtags at this point. Hashtag taking back the narrative, because the narrative that is out there about Israel and Jews, intertwine them together, is so inaccurate, right? So we have other people framing our narrative. We need to take our actual narrative back.
Back. Exactly. I love that. It makes so much sense to me. And we know how much, the media is spewing misinformation, even blatant lies about Israel, about the Middle East, and about the Jewish people, right? And you are actively trying to change that with education. I think that's so, so powerful. So, what are some of those biggest misconceptions or pieces of misinformation that well-meaning people, whether they are pro-Israel educators or activists, like what misinformation are they perpetuating? Not so much the average person, but let's
Right.
just say like someone who's already in this kind of pro-Israel camp.
This is a very controversial thing to say, but it has to be said. So I hope that this podcast is not too PC. But you can find any posts, and I have said this many times. I call it the Hebrew School to Anti-Zionism pipeline.
Hmm.
And I've seen it myself. First of all, I have friends who teach in Jewish day schools who are Hebrew school teachers. You have a 5-minute conversation with them. It's ancient Israel, then they say modern Israel. They say we all left for 2,000 years. Okay, so my brother-in-law is not a Jew. And he for many years was not pro-Israel. He now is getting there, but he's not a history person. So all the historical facts I throw at him, think it's like 90% there. We're trying to get him at 100. But he told me years ago, well, if all of you left for 2,000 years and the Arabs moved in, and then you guys came back after the Holocaust, you then came back to Arab land. So by that connectivity, it makes sense if we don't push back with facts, right? So if we
Right,
say no, 700,000 plus Jews remained in Israel after the last exile in 136 AD, whether we want to share dates or not, just after the last exile, that population waxed and waned depending on the ruler. So the Crusaders obviously decimated a lot of our population, but our population grew dramatically actually under Muslim caliphates.
right.
Muslims were much better to us in Palestine than the Christians were, fared much, much better. In fact, I would love to have 2 holidays added to our very busy Judean holiday schedule to honor 2 Muslim rulers who
Hmm.
did so much for Jews. One of them being Saladin the First. He's the one who defeated the Crusaders, invited Jews back to Jerusalem. Not only that, but he also invited Jews in Arab lands to come back home. He did all that, you know? What about under Ottoman times? The first half of the Ottoman rule was very philo-Semitic, not only to Jews in the vast Ottoman Empire, but also in Palestine. So the Kotel, we love and adore the Kotel. It's the closest we have access to the holiest place in our faith, which is the Temple Mount's Holy of Holies. There was an earthquake in the 16th century, which revealed the retaining wall, the Kotel, as we say in Hebrew, right? And it was an Ottoman ruler who not only allowed Jews to pray there, but made it very accessible for Jews
Mm.
and made it like part of the law that Jews can pray there without interference and would
Wow.
punish anyone, actually primarily Christians back then, who would try to thwart any prayer and access that we wanted to obtain. Because of him, he's the one who worked with wealthy Judeans, both in the diaspora and in Israel, to rebuild Tiberias, wanted to build up Tzfat even more. So the population in Tzfat increased tenfold because of a Muslim ruler,
Wow. I did not
right?
know that.
Yeah, so all of this stuff is very, very interesting to learn. So okay, so I would say those are the top things, right? So like we all left when we did not. Um, that there was an ancient Israel and now there's some modern Israel. It's the same
Mm.
Israel. It was under occupation for nearly
Right.
2,000 years. So what's better is to say there was ancient times, there was, let's say you want to call it the Middle Ages, or another option, there was ancient times and then post-exile occupation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then post-liberation, because it was Jews, brave Jews, who fought the British occupiers for 20 plus years to liberate Israel from the clutches, from the anti-Semitic claws of the British.
Right.
Too many Jews really like to smooth out the British. Like we never, like when we think about who we have not hatred, well, it depends who you talk to, but like who we have animosity towards, right? Like when we talk about
Mm-hmm.
the Shoah, which is the Holocaust, and Jew hatred, it's the same countries that come up. It's either the Muslim countries, right? Like talking about all the
Mm-hmm.
wars after 1948, or we talk about Germany. Germany is was the least of our problems. Yes, they instigated World War II. I'm not denying that. But first of all, the Germans even said without the help of the Poles and the Ukrainians and the Lithuanians, the final solution would have never been able to happen. And the British occupying Palestine is what murdered so many Jews from escaping
Right.
Nazi Germany, right? And then not only were they blocked from coming home, then they were then detained once they were
Yeah.
even able to get back, right? So we
Yeah.
need to start blaming the British. And I had on my podcast a scholar on the British occupation, because in Israel, that's a field of study, which is amazing. And he said the British are just as responsible for the Holocaust as the Germans.
Wow.
Right. And of course, he gave a lot of information and like how that happened. Well, first of all of the Arab riots in Israel were fomented by the British occupiers. Before they came in 1920, Arabs were not killing Jews in Israel. They just were not. It was the Druze actually who were killing Jews,
Mm.
but for different reasons. It was like more territorial, land grabs, it was power plays, it was uh, loyalty questionings. But and actually, a fun fact, sometimes Jews would hire Arabs to protect them against the Druze
Wow.
on this situation. So you see, history is not so black and white, right? Like that's another misconception I see all the time online. Muslim bad, Christian good. Muslim bad, everyone else good. In Israel, not so much, right? Just depends on the time period, right? Now we're best friends with Christians. We were not, for nearly 2,000 years within
True.
Israel. Not all Muslims, there were actually a lot of Arab Zionists
True.
before 1948, before the 1930s, before Arab nationalism brought in. So I would say those were the bigger ones. And then also the terminology, right? Like Jews say Jews and Palestinians. So as soon as we say Jews and Palestinians, we lost the battle.
Mm.
Because then, okay, so if there's Jews and Palestinians, that means there's an Israel and a Palestine. looks like Palestine is being occupied by Israel. And then right away, it's not that far-fetched to blame Israel for genocide, right? Like, oh my gosh, those poor Palestinians, they're being
The
bombed to
slippery
smithereens.
slope.
Yeah. But instead, we need to know our own history and say, no, Jews were called Palestinians for nearly 2,000 years. Arab occupiers, which is not a derogatory term whatsoever, it's a historical term, actually was told to me by an Arab Zionist friend. He said, you need to start differentiating between Arabs who make up most of the Middle East, right? And how did Arabs get to Israel? Were they invited by any Jew?
Hmm.
No, right? They came as occupiers, right? So he said, start calling them Arab occupiers in terms of provenance. They came from 25 different Muslim countries, uninvited, that's the operative word, by any Jew.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean that they don't deserve full legal rights, which they have, but let's stop lying to ourselves and to the community and the world at large, right? So there are no Jews and Palestinians. There's Jews and Arab occupiers in Israel. Obviously, there are more populations that exist there. But if we're talking about freeing Palestine, I think that's a wonderful thing. We should free the rest of Palestine, which is quote unquote Jordan. That's 78% of the Judean homeland. And if someone wants to call themselves a Palestinian, they're welcome to if they have Judean genetics. Now, here's where it gets the gray zone. 30 to 40% of Arabs in Judea and Samaria do have genetic Judean ancestry.
Hmm.
There was a conversion period from the 11th century. I'm not going to get into that whole story, but unless someone's interested towards the end. So they have all the right to call themselves Palestinians because they are of the land, but that's only 30 to 40% of them, right? So that's why it's not so clear cut with the population spread, but we need to be very clear cut about definitions.
Right. Yeah. So, like, how would you recommend just like let's just say you're having a conversation with a
Mhm.
friend or neighbor or coworker, and they start using that term Palestine or oh, well, I wish they weren't killing so many
Right.
kids in Palestine. Like, what would you say in a, non-confrontational
Sure.
way
Yeah.
to just give them a quick piece of education?
Yeah, so I've had that conversation many times, and I love those conversations because to me, see, here's the thing. When we embody true Zionism, and that means more than just I love Israel, right? Like knowing our history, knowing the terminology, Jew hatred no longer scares us, especially of the verbal kind. Like obviously, if you're going
Mhm.
to the protests and you're getting beat up, okay, I can see I can see us being a little bit scared if we don't have the self-defense. But those of us, and there are many, who go online, see all the hate online, and are
Mhm.
just scared and despondent. Like, what are you scared about? You have 4,000 plus years of proud Judean heritage to fall back on. Right?
Yeah.
So if someone says, okay, so Israel's killing all the children in Palestine. So I would, so what this is what I say. I say, well, Gaza is actually Judean land. Most of the people who live in Gaza currently are Egyptian nationals who were resettled after 1948 and radicalized. And they were the ones who elected Hamas in a landslide
Yeah, that's it.
election. They don't fight back against Hamas. All the riots that we saw, that were supposedly against Hamas were orchestrated by Hamas, trying to fool the world population. And so what does anyone expect? When there was a genocide against Jews on October 7th, the army, of course, is going to go in and bomb the shit out of the population that enacted that atrocity.
Mhm.
There's nothing to apologize. And that's the thing too with a lot of Jews, and I see this all the time. I have not seen it with you or Ricky, but I've seen it in the greater population. We're apologizing, constantly apologizing. Yeah, like we're in this war, but it's against Hamas. It's not against the populations. But explain that the population in Judea and Gaza is Hamas. Just like the
Right.
Arab occupiers in Judea and Samaria love Hamas. They also
Right. Nobody talks
uphold
about that. I
no
saw
one,
some
yeah.
statistics like with some survey done shortly after October 7th, and it was around 75 to 85% of the population in Gaza agreed with October 7th attacks and Hamas's approach to annihilating Israel. So I agree with that. Also,
And
they
Judea
were
and
given,
Samaria. It was 90% Judea and Samaria that was applauding the genocide. And
Right.
then we have Jews who applauded when Netanyahu was feeding the Arab occupiers in Judea and Gaza. That's going against the grain of thousands of years of proven military tactics to get back your hostages. Us feeding, like us, I mean, Israel feeding the population is what kept our hostages there for 2+ years.
Mm.
Like we don't live in a fairy tale. This is real life. And when our people were not just murdered, which is horrible enough, right? Like to murder someone. Our people were mutilated, were sexually tortured to degrees not even seen during the Holocaust. Like if there were Holocaust survivors after October 7th who was saying the level of barbarity exhibited by Hamas, and by the way, it wasn't just Hamas, you know this, right?
It was so yeah, civilian
20,
populations that
20,
felt compelled.
2,200 civilians joined up with Hamas. It's a lot, considering there's only 1.8 million people in Gaza. You're talking about a significant population,
Hmm.
2,200. So the Holocaust survivors were saying, and this is true, the level of sexual barbarity, the level of just mutilation.
Hmm.
The Nazis were not even doing that. And the Nazis did plenty of evil, as we know.
Right.
So for the Holocaust survivors to be shocked, why are we then apologizing for Tzahal, which is the IDF, doing their job? And by the way, I don't know about you, but I have friends who served in that 2-year war and they were complaining. They said, we could have done so much more. We were handcuffed
Mm, I've also
by
heard
the
that
government.
too. Right. Yes, because for better or worse, so many arguments. I think that, of course, the Israeli government is also thinking about the PR, and we
Right.
know that
It's
we're
horrible.
losing the media war, and so trying to figure that
And
out. I
that's a
mean,
great war to lose. That's the thing. When we win any PR war, it means more of our people either have been murdered or will be murdered. It's how it
right.
is.
Or we
No,
compromised on some of our important values that we shouldn't have, you know?
well, actually, let's talk about Judean values, right? That's something else that a lot of Jews get wrong. A lot of
Yeah.
Jews think that our values is bookish, right? Like, oh, we're sitting and we're studying the Torah and we're not Christians. We don't turn the other cheek. Nowhere in the Torah does it say turn the other cheek. What it does say in the Torah is rise and kill first. Now, that does not mean we go to seek out murdering people for the fun of it. We're not doing that as a sport. But what it means is if you as an individual feel threatened, if your family is being threatened, wider lens, your community, small, medium, or large, feels threatened, don't wait for anyone to kill you. Get up, get your weapons, whatever weapons of choice, depending on the era, of course, and go take care of the problem. Do not be killed. Rise and kill first is a Judean value. And then a lot of Jews don't even know that we come from warrior tribal. We're tribal people, just like all the
Mhm.
Middle Eastern people are tribal people, tribal warrior stock. That's who we really are. And we have taken the fight to others before to avenge whatever catastrophe has befallen us. And we have also defended our territory. We've conquered. How do we think Israel expanded, right? Out of Judea and Samaria. Wasn't just by knocking on like little village doors, like, hi, can we have your land? Thanks. No, we had strong warriors who conquered other tribes. That's how we expanded our land. That's
Mhm.
how we obtained Jerusalem. That's how we got Gaza. That's how we got the Golan, southern Israel. What would become, what was Israel East, aka Jordan? We beat the Moabites, the Edoraeans up north, which is southern Israel. We beat the Philistines. We plotted, we this. We acted like every other Middle Eastern native population. And that's something we should be proud of and not something that we need to squash.
Exactly. Exactly. And I love talking to you about this because it's like fostering a greater sense of, as you call it, Judean pride, which was a new term to me. I mean, I had heard of like Jewish pride, but Judean pride.
Judean, Judean.
Right? Because we're descendants from these warriors, and we still have that in our blood. We're not just, oh, these poor victims, look at us, we're getting killed again, just like
Right.
we did in the Holocaust. No, we actively fight back and try to make a better world for our people and for the whole world, even despite all of these killings and atrocities, we continue to bring great accomplishments and contributions to medical field, to the sciences, to technology, to agriculture, to all of these things, Nobel Peace Prizes. It's just remarkable. So I really want to stress that because we can't have this victim mentality all the time, which I also feel is part of the problem and
It's a
aids.
loophole. I call it the victim
Yeah, aids
loopology.
in that misinformation.
I'll give you another example. Okay, so we just observed Yom HaShoah,
Mhm.
which thankfully is gaining in popularity over the UN. I do not observe the UN day in January because they celebrate dead Jews and they then help in murdering the living Jews in Israel, right? Like obviously the UN is very anti-Israel. So then they pat themselves on the back, all the EU countries and the UN countries of the UN. Well, we celebrated the dead Jews. We did a little ceremony, and
Hmm.
now we can vote against Israel. Now we can block arms to Israel. So forget about that day. I really applaud Israel for choosing Yom HaShoah. Why? It was the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising.
Mm,
It was our month-long pushback against the Nazis, thanks to Beitar, of course, and the Lehi for supplying the weapons into the ghetto. But it shows Judean strength. And do
exactly.
you like how many of us know? Like I only learned this, by the way, 2 years ago, long after I became a Zionist, long after I launched TBTN. Nearly every single ghetto during the Holocaust had an armed unit. Did we
Yeah,
know
they
about
don't
this?
teach that in the history books, right?
No, we don't. Like, so let me ask you, like, so in your education, did you go beyond learning about Jews hiding? Did you know anything about that there were 10 plus?
Growing up, no. I just went to a public school in Minnesota where I grew up. I never knew any of this. That's why it's so refreshing to, first of all, talk to you because I always learn something new. And also having built, different educational initiatives for Ricky, it's really opened my eyes. And I really see that there is so much more for me and us to learn. And you don't have to just be Jewish to learn this. This information is available to anyone. I know you have people from all different faith
Yeah.
backgrounds and even countries that join your programs, right? So it's there for us to learn, but I was not exposed to any of this. It was just dead Jews. There was anti-Semitism during the Holocaust. Oh, but the Allies won and everything went back to normal. Yay.
And
That was
did you
basically it.
learn? I only learned this thanks to a Ken Burns documentary that came out, what, like 5 years ago, that there were 500,000 American Jews who served in the army, primarily, obviously, focused on fighting against Hitler. I mean, they were not all sent to the European theater. Some of them obviously were sent to the Pacific, but the motivation was obviously to be the Nazis. 500,000
Oh, I did not know that.
during World War
Mind
II.
blowing.
And now we have what, 7 million plus Jews in America. Back then, there were, I don't even know, like don't quote me, but definitely not 7 million.
There was less, yes,
Sure.
but that's that warrior culture. It's still
That's
like
not
in
for
our
culture.
DNA.
I didn't learn that in school. This is what I learned in school. In fifth grade, we read Anne Frank's diary. I'm not saying we should not study her. We should. And there was nothing wrong with hiding. Look, however Jews survived, we survived, right? There's no shame in hiding. Anyone would do that to survive the Holocaust. But that's all we learned. We learned that Jews were hiding. We learned about obviously the death camps and the crematoriums. The Allies saved. There was no talk about all the help that the Jews in Palestine were providing in Italy, in North Africa. Like they were expanding down there
Mhm.
too. Nothing about the arms smuggling that was going on. Like know about armed units, partisan, right? You're telling me
Right.
on my podcast that your grandmother was part of a partisan unit. No talk about the Bielski partisans, Jared Kushner's
Mhm.
grandparents. They saved 1,200 plus Jews. None of that. And so I was sitting down with the executive director of JNF USA. This was a couple of
Mhm.
years ago. And he told me and he's older than me by 20 years. And he said, when I grew up in Texas, there was rampant, I mean, real anti-Semitism. And I'm not trying to diminish what we have now, but we're talking about there were signs, he said, all over Texas, and this was repeated even up north. No Jews, no Catholics, because Catholics were also
Mhm.
discriminated against. No Jews, no Catholics, no blacks, no dogs. We were
Wow.
all compared to dogs. And so Jews, were not allowed at swimming pools with Christians, with white Christians. Jews could not just go on vacation. The book, the movie for Black people, The Green Book, I think came out.
I think so. Yeah.
It was like, a safe place for Black people to travel, like, which hotels are safe, which roads. Jews, actually, the Black people got the inspiration for the Green Book, and that we were actually working in tandem with that community from Jews, because in the early 1900s we needed our own Green Book.
Right.
Like which hotels were safe. There were whole towns. Shockingly, I know a lot of people would not believe it now. Much of southern Florida was
Wow. Off
completely
limits.
locked to Jews to buy. Bal Harbor. Blacks and
Mm.
Jews could not live there until 1982.
Wow.
Extremely long. Why are there Jewish country clubs all over America? Because we were not let into the regular country clubs. We
Exactly.
had to make our own. Why is there Yeshiva University? Why is there a Torah law school? Because there were law schools who didn't let us in. We were shut out from the Ivies for many, for decades. So he was saying that growing up with, that anti-Semitism in your face, like, you can't go here, you can't go here, you're less than, you're not white, you're not this, you're not that. He said being a Jew was like playing a bad hand at poker. You got dealt a bad hand, right?
Yep.
So he didn't grow up with Judean empowerment because he said everything about being a Jew was painted as a negative, like for
Right.
things that he saw in person, and then he would come home and then he would just, like the Holocaust, or then like if we're going to go back in history, just the Inquisition. So if the kids, and let's, now link it to today, so now we have kids, if they're only being taught the Inquisition, the Holocaust, October 7th, we're scared about this hatred now. What pride is there left?
Right.
What's there to be excited about?
And that's even if they are talking about October 7th and modern day issues of anti-Semitism, which I am skeptical of. I don't know. I don't think the schools have caught up to talking about those subjects yet.
Even at home. I mean, like at home, like with their
Yeah,
parents,
that
right?
that too.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, no,
like
you're right.
it starts at the home. Like, so if your parents are only like the Holocaust, this is this. Again, I'm not saying we should not talk about the Holocaust. We should. Although Holocaust education needs complete reformment. And
Yes.
I'm not the one who thought of this first, Dr. Ruth Wiss. If you can get
Hmm.
her on, she's incredible. She's the first one decades ago, or over a decade, said the way the Holocaust is taught in America is abysmal, right? Like it paints Jews as victims.
Right.
Talk
Hmm.
about
I
it was
totally
it
agree.
was a culmination of Jew hatred of 2000, okay, so many issues. So this is where TBTN comes in. And yes, we're talking about issues of occupation, of course, of our homeland. We can't get away from that. That's not something to be embarrassed about. But let's talk about Judean empowerment,
Hmm.
that we
100%.
survived, we thrived. And by the way, not all the occupations were that terrible, like I mentioned before, right? And not all Jews were sitting ducks during the Holocaust. There were, again, like there was like your grandmother, like my own grandmother didn't save a lot of Jews, but she saved her entire huge family. She moved 16 hours east into the Urals. Other people, were doing what they could, right? Getting on boats to Palestine, working with Beitar. Beitar is something that we need to all applaud, and celebrate more of. They did so much for Jews throughout the ages. So again, like I said, if we were just victims, victims do not survive and thrive with all the, topics you were mentioning, like we give back in science and technology and agriculture and on and on and on. Victims do not survive and thrive for 4,000 plus years. They don't.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I love that. Um, just in general from your work, because I know you do so much, can you highlight a story of a recent win? Maybe you had somebody have like a very powerful aha light bulb moment, or somebody gave you amazing feedback, or just something that you felt was a win.
So there've been many. So I built it out in stages, right? So the first stage was when I was just sharing facts online. Like I didn't know who was going to absorb this information. And so in the beginning, it was mostly people online who were saying, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea about this XYZ, ABC, on and on and on." And then they would say, oh, I'm going to share this with my family. I'm going to share this with my friends, with my coworkers. I think those were the seedlings that eventually ended up being taking back the narrative as a Zionism education company, right?
Mhm.
Something to codify, something to progress in terms of programming, right? Like, let's move forward with this. There's something here. When I launched my classes, Israel Explained through the lens of history, I started winter 2023. We just finished our ninth course. Very proud of that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a lot, like to create something from scratch, to have it be proprietary, for companies to ask for to lease that information for money, that's pretty incredible. So at first it was just Jews who were signing up, and nothing wrong with that. But I was shocked when maybe a third in to the class offerings, I was getting signups from Morocco, from
Wow.
Iraq, from Egypt. And so much so that there was actually a fan club in Egypt that I was sending materials to. And
Oh, that's so cool.
but think about the bravery that that takes, right? So, very interesting story here, and I hope I'm not going to get anyone in trouble. Saddam Hussein, we all know obviously how notorious he was towards his people, obviously hated Israel. Well, guess who I'm friends with? I'm friends with a nephew of his who's a
Wow.
super Zionist. I mean, it took a while for me to even trust the guy. Some Arab guy reached out to me on Facebook years ago, and I was very skeptical back then of, Arabs. Was like, sure, I'll talk to you as a friend. And he was telling me, he's like, well, if Saddam is my uncle, I'm like, oh, BS. Like it's not true, right? Like anyone can make up anything. He showed me documentation of his
Wow.
family and how America helped his family, obviously not Saddam's, like his immediate family moved to quote unquote Jordan, during the war, and then he made their way to Germany. Okay, so obviously the rest of his family are not Zionist. They don't hate Israel, but they're not Zionist. He's a super Zionist. But
Wow.
and to the point, the day after the genocide, so we're talking about October 8th, he WhatsApped me with information about jihadi groups in Iraq that were connected to Hamas. And he's,
Wow.
can you get this information to the IDF as if have some like magic?
Connection.
So I worked the phone, and like I contacted every Jew I know. I was like, do you have a contact with the IDF? Because look what I have here. Very, very highly sensitive information.
Wow.
I hope it went out there. I didn't, like who knows, right? Like I didn't want to get in trouble with the American government with what I was sharing, but I hope that it was helpful. And
Wow.
so think about the bravery, because for him and his network, who remains in Iraq, that are Zionists, he said there's a growing number of Zionists in Iraq. But should the government find out about them, they're all going to jail,
Right.
and like real jail that they have, which is torture, not
Mhm.
like American jails, right? Like real prisons. Think about even in Egypt, they torture, if you're an active Zionist.
Wow.
So that's the level of bravery that we need to appreciate
That's incredible.
for the Arabs, right? So again, like there should be, we hope that there are more of them. I'm sure there's many closeted, but again, it's not all of them, and it's all about misinformation. Just like we're
Right.
misinformed, they're highly misinformed. We can't blame them because of all the brainwashing.
Right. No, that is a huge win, though, to be able to engage some of that population and give them
The
credible
materials,
information.
yeah,
But of course, they have to be open and
of
receptive to
course.
it. So how did they even find out about your program?
Online, like they're on LinkedIn, they're on Facebook, right? That's how
Hmm.
the guy found me. So then there were other wins that I was really proud of. So also related to the class, that the goal of the classes is just, okay, so whoever signs up by the end of the course, they're on expert level of Zionism education, right? But then what I was finding out that they were taking that information, some of the students, reversing school board decisions,
Wow.
seeing company divestment, you know, uh, law, not laws, like votes, like, oh, let's
Mhm.
divest from Israel. They were using that solid information to then benefit Jews and to fight
And
back
change
against
minds.
anti-Semitism. Yeah. Another thing, I started speaking engagements, and everyone was telling me like, oh, you need to be careful with left-wing groups and this and that. I said, look, there's no ideology, there's no Israel is not political. When we make it political, that's dangerous, right?
Right.
Oh, it's left, it's right, it's middle. There are policies, of course, that are left, right, and middle, but facts, historical facts, are not political.
Exactly.
And so I loved that, like I didn't even blink. I said, of course, I'm going to speak to this group that's very, very, very left. And I was very pleasantly surprised after all of this, uh, you know, um, uh scaremongering, right? Like, oh my gosh, they're left, like they're gonna be like hostile to you. They were a lovely crowd. Could not be lovelier. They were engaged, they were asking questions. They were coming up to me after the Q&A to have side conversations. They wanted more and more and more. And so that's another thing we need to work on as a community. Let's not be afraid because of labels.
Exactly.
The facts are there to speak for themselves. And whoever wants to retain the information, that's fine. And if people don't want to receive that information, that's also fine.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
not here to push, we're here to share.
I love that. And that, that's something that I'm also proud of with RICI is that we've always been nonpartisan. We're not right or left. We're not endorsing candidates. We're just trying to bring light to the truth about Israel, about anti-Semitism, about Jewish people in our history. That's very much central to our mission. So I'm so proud to hear that you are doing that as well. I think it's tremendous that, people from all over the world are getting this education. And like you said too, we're not out there to get I guess the radical 10% who already really hate Israel,
Yeah.
right? We're looking for like the middle 70 to 80% of the population who has heard different things but
Right.
really doesn't know much about the history. And a lot of Jews are included in that, and I would include myself, a few years ago in that
Right.
mix too.
I
I'm
mean, me,
further
myself
along,
too. Yeah.
but I haven't arrived because I'm very much still learning. There's
But we
just so
we all
much,
are. I
you know.
just learned something. I'm not going to get into the details because I really need to flesh it out a little bit more. So for years, I was reading that it was the French fault that we lost what is now considered southern Lebanon. Okay,
Hmm.
like just I read the fact, I took the fact as facts and moved on with my life. No. There's more to the backstory that I'm learning now. It was actually the Jews' fault in Lebanon. There was a Jude
Oh,
there was a Judean council of Sidon. I'm not going to bore your audience with all the details, but there was basically infighting amongst the Jewish council, and half were Zionists, half were not Zionists. Half
mhm.
wanted to appease their Muslim and Christian neighbors and be Lebanon first, which is, fine. And then the others wanted to obviously adhere to the historical accuracy of where Sidon was located, which since 103 BC had been Israel, had been part of Judea. So sometimes we can blame the Jews because some things are our fault, like
Yeah.
the confiscation of southern Lebanon away from Judea. So interesting, right? And that's something I literally learned less than a week ago.
Wow.
So
That's
I
amazing.
constantly learning because I have this philosophy: if we stop learning, we are dead
Mhm.
because there's always more to learn. Or even if we know a topic we think pretty well, there's more and more to dig into it. There's
Yeah.
always more details to find out.
Another perspective to look at it with. That's
Mhm.
that's so true.
Or
And
just level of detail tue, right? Like for example, like we can say, okay, well, there were 12 Judean tribes in the Hejaz, which is Arabia, or what was Arabia, right? One clan was killed by Muhammad, two were expelled, nine remained, and move on with that information. Or, right, along the way, we can dig into details and realize it wasn't so black and white. Why
right.
was that one clan killed? Did we do something to be killed? Maybe, right? Like
Yeah.
on and on
Like
and on,
digging
right?
past it, right? And
Right.
yeah, you can only do that if you are committed to sitting down with an open mind and taking the time to learn these things. If
Right.
you think you can just learn all of this from headlines
No, of course
or,
not.
30-second
No, no.
TikTok clips, I'm sorry to tell you guys, but it's not going to happen, right? And
You
so, I
have to
mean,
have that
those things, of
interest.
course, can make a difference, right? We could still put out short form content, but somebody needs to really sit down and like learn
Right.
this. information from a comprehensive way. So I think that is amazing.
Like
What you guys
for
are doing.
example, the chant that a lot of Muslims we scream like Hyber, Hyber, Ya Yahud, right? It's meant as this warmongering malicious chant against Jews. Like, oh, Jews are weak, we conquered you by sword, in this land
Mhm.
and that land. Well, let's dig under the surface. So I just did a post about this the other day. No, it was a drawn out battle that was instigated by Jews against
Mm,
Muhammad's army. So that chant, hyper, hyper, ya Yahud, right, that they like scream with all of their might, no longer is scary, right?
right. When you understand the
It
context.
takes it takes it takes away the power. It takes back the
Exactly.
power. That's what I mean.
Takes back the power and takes back the narrative, right?
There we go.
And that's a good tagline. So I know we're about to wrap up here, but just really quickly, I know we talked about it the other day together, but about these bigger legacy Jewish organization. This is something that you and I have connected upon, and we feel that they've failed us as a Jewish people. Can you talk about that more and what we can do about it? And I say we as this pro-Israel activist, educators, community organizing community. What can we do about some of the failures from these bigger legacy Jewish organizations? So when I say that, I'm talking about as a whole, like the Jewish Federations, ADL, JNF, similar type organizations.
APAC, ZOA, camera. I mean,
Hmm.
on and on. It doesn't, when we talk about legacy, it doesn't even mean like the big, big ones. It means the more established ones
The establishment, right?
who don't want to change. Like for example, like I obviously have a very small Zionism education company, completely not legacy. But part and RICI also, right? Like RICI is hopefully like growing and I can see that. But we're, I think, malleable, right? Like if we come upon information, I had to change, I don't know if I told this story, I had to change my business card in the beginning
Mm.
because some mayor in Samaria of Judea and Samaria reached out to me and said, the Golan Heights on your logo is not pronounced enough. And I said, what
Oh,
are you talking about? This is drawn to scale to fit the business card. It's fine.
yeah.
And he pushed back and he said, no, it doesn't jut out. And he gave me all these directionals. And it took maturity to acquiesce to his correct information. And I was wrong, right? And it cost $500 to correct this inaccuracy, right? Like to redo all the logo, to reprint all the business cards. But we have to learn from our mistakes. And so the
Hmm.
legacy organizations, and I used to be part of all of them. So I'm not talking about as an outsider. I'm talking about the issue as a former insider. How was I an insider? I was either a major donor, which you have to be on a board. So I was on
Hmm.
senior boards, I was on junior boards. Anytime you're on a board, you're giving on a monthly basis, not like 50, $100, so like a hefty amount. So you're invested, they call you in for meetings, you get invited to galas, this and this and that. And then you realize, okay, so what's missing of the 8 organizations I'm part of, and I love all of you, and I did back then, let's start a Zionism education unit. Why is there pushback? No, 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 we're fine. We're doing everything we can. We're fine. We're fine. But anti-Semitism is skyrocketing.
Yeah, it's not fine.
It's not fine. And then why am I coming to right? This is after I was learning, more and more facts. Why am I coming to your events and I'm learning that the UN created Israel in 1947? That
Right.
didn't happen. The UN was what happened in 1947 was a British anti-Semitic coup to steal more land away from the 22% that was left of Israel and give it to the Arabs. That's all it was. Luckily, let's thank the Arabs for rejecting that plan because most Jews were not on board. So the fact that every year most of those legacy organizations celebrate Resolution 181, are you okay? Like are you guys mentally like unwell to do this, right? Like you're celebrating an anti-Semitic move at the UN by the British, right? So I'm
That's
learning that
appalling.
right. So I'm learning that the UN created Israel. I'm learning that they're Israelites and Jews, same people, just lived under 2 different kingdoms. And that kingdom, the United Kingdom, only lasted barely like 100 years. We were always Jews, just
Yeah,
from a different kingdom.
doesn't make any sense.
Why am I
Like
learning?
shooting ourselves in the foot, right? If you're
Exactly.
starting off with such misinformation, how are you going to be able to achieve whatever your mission is? And they usually say it's to combat anti-Semitism, but I don't see
It's
them
aiding,
really
it's
taking
aiding, it's
action.
literally upholding, right? Or another thing,
Yeah.
why am I learning from those organizations that Jews are only 3,000 years old? We're 4,000 plus. Why are you ignoring the 1,000 years before we had a united monarchy? That was
Mhm.
lived history. That was actual history. And the last example, we have Yom Ha'atzmaut coming up. For those who might not know,
Right.
that's the not the birthday of Israel. That's the Independence Day of Israel.
Our
India
Liberation Day.
India does not say we're celebrating our birthday from 1947, right? Yeah, yeah, they were 47. They celebrate their Independence Day. Why are we birthdaying our way into anti-Semitism? Because as soon as we
Exactly.
say birthday, anti-Semites or just misinformed people or those who don't know would be like, wait, so Israel's only 78 years old?
Yeah. And who did they take the land from? They must have colonized, right?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense. And when you said before in the big on top of the podcast about the media, right? Like blaming the media. I mean, let's be real, Jews are part of the media. We don't control the media, but we're part of the media. And so during the 2 year plus war, how come every single time on Fox News, Newsmax, I'm talking about like the right wing, like the right-leaning organizations, they head on Judean leaders, give them credit for that. But why am I learning from these Judean leaders Jews and Palestinians, Israel and Palestine? Elon Levy, who was the spokesperson, for on behalf of Israel during
Mhm.
the war, why is he saying Israel was founded in 1948? So you're misinforming, not you, obviously, but then that's
Mhm.
misinforming a non-Judean
Audience.
majority audience.
Hmm.
So we have no one. So when we're talking about the media, we're talking about ourselves also.
Right. You're so
We
right. We
need, we need to,
definitely are
right,
part of
we need
that
to police
problem.
ourselves. Netanyahu just had a speech a couple of days ago. It was filled with inaccuracies. And
Mm.
so, he obviously is famous worldwide, and people that are non-Jews are reposting it widely on Facebook. I can't keep up, nor do I have the capacity to correct every single post that features this inaccurate speech.
Mm.
But half of the information about Israel is inaccurate.
Mm.
It's so frustrating. So that's the thing with the legacy organizations. And that's the thing too, like it's that pipeline, the Hebrew school to misinformation pipeline. They don't know what they don't know. But then you also have the publications. How come when I would submit my articles to American Thinker, they're not Judean. I never got pushback. And they fact check, of course, but they never said, oh, say West Bank and not Judea and Samaria. When I submitted my articles to JNS, the Jewish News Syndicate, why was I met with, oh, you have to say West Bank, not Judea and Samaria? Why are you dismissing an entire article when I say that the Ottomans stopped Judean immigration to Palestine in 1882? And the editor would tell me, oh, I didn't learn that in school, so it didn't happen. I didn't learn a lot of things in school.
Cool.
But
Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Yeah, it's
sending
just
you the source.
very
You know?
frustrating.
Yeah, like when you say Israel and again, like Israel and Palestine, this and that. But here's the thing, I just wrote a post about this, and this is so true. We got a lot of traction online. The legacy organizations, this is a hard pill to swallow. They thrive on anti-Semitism.
Mm.
Because without anti-Semitism, they can't promise to end Jew hatred. They can't promise to combat anti-Semitism. That's how they get their money, right? That's how they get their memberships. That's how they get their donors, that they're high-level donors, right? It's that promise. We're gonna fight, we're gonna fight, we're gonna fight against this evil. If that evil were to stop, let's just say tomorrow, anti-Semitism ceases to exist in this like utopian world, they're all gonna lose their jobs.
Right. And then they have really nothing to show for it, and they don't have any education still.
But why would TBTN not cease to exist? Because I'm not
Exactly.
here. TBTN is not here to combat anti-Semitism. TBTN exists to enact Judean empowerment through historical information and usage of
Incredible.
non-anti-Semitic terminology. So they refuse to engage with Judean empowerment and the victimology. I call it the victimology loop, right?
Right.
Everyone hates us. We've always been victims. dead Jews, weak Jews, this I mean like I'm shocked that I even was part of that system
Goes,
for
I
10
know it goes
years.
on and on. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't blame you because,
Mhm.
you wanted to make a difference. And I'm not saying that all the work that they do is bad. They definitely do some good things, but I totally hear you. And I think that's why at least I identify Ricky as a grassroots
Right.
organization, a more groundbreaking
Very, very
organization like
different, right?
ours.
That's the thing. And like I told you in the podcast that you were on as a guest for TB on TBTN's podcast, that if there were dozens, forget about hundreds, if there were dozens of Rickies across America, we would have far less anti-Semitism. And that's the thing too, like, like are the people who work at these organizations evil? Of course not. They don't wake up in the morning, and I say this in my speeches when I speak to audiences, they don't wake up in the morning thinking, how do I screw over Israel? They don't. They wake up in the morning thinking, how do I fight anti-Semitism? But they just, again, A, it's they don't know what they don't know, and B, they don't really assess the situation.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's important, like I did throughout the last 4 years, sometimes it's good to step back and think, what is the environment like right now?
Hmm.
And what angle and why? It's the why, right?
Why is it like this
Mhm.
and what's missing? And I think you're helping to fill that gap of what is missing. I would also argue that Ricky
That was
locally
right.
is helping to fill that gap and hopefully more nationally and internationally as we're also putting out more and more content as well. I think we can start to flip that script. So with that, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I just want to end with how people can get involved with TPTN. How do they find you? I'm happy to also show the website if you want to walk people through that.
Yeah, let's do a little walkthrough. So the best way to find TBTN is online, tbtnisrael.com. Thank you, Maria, for bringing this the website up. Also, you can find me on Instagram, Zionism underscore taking back the narrative. I'm on LinkedIn. I post a lot. And I love fielding questions, comments, very responsive to all communication, whether it's speaking engagements to your communities, whether it's building up a Zionism education program for your organization, leasing proprietary materials, educating educators. There are organizations that have
Wow.
educators, very comprehensive. So if you can scroll up to the top
Yeah.
just really quickly. Okay. So obviously up top we have the major offerings from the glossary. There's a great PDF on the left-hand side called Top Anti-Semitic Lies. Very comprehensive. Anything you hear, we address there from
Wow.
what is Palestinian, just like a little, yeah, like it's a lot of topics. It's nine pages of a PDF.
Wow, that's
Uh,
great.
right. So that's that. And then on in that blue space, those are the topic. That's the topic section. So we're talking about Judea and Samaria, Ottoman Empire, British occupation, what makes Israel legal, right? The legality of Israel, Judean resistance groups, right? Israel was not just handed over back to Jews from the British. We had a fight for it for 20 plus years. Who were the players, from that era? Who are the Palestinians? Goes into obviously Jews, like what made that term related to Jews, who are the Arab occupiers, Jordanian occupation. Obviously, you can see Judean history in Gaza, right? For thousands of years, that was a Judean port city, very rich Judean history. The Nakba, what is the Nakba? What's the actual Nakba? Operation SIG is the foundational route to understand why there is anti-Semitism across academia, across NGOs, and in the media today. And of course, we have the top anti-Semitic lies. If you scroll down a little further, I just want to show the audience the
Sure.
scrollable map, which is very unique. No one else has this.
This is so cool. I love this.
Yeah. So this goes through 4,000 years of the top most important events that happened in Israel.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Needless to say, my graphic designer, who's very talented, did not like me for a couple of weeks as she was working on this.
This is incredible. It's such a wealth of information, Laureen, and you've created
Thank you.
a
So let's scroll
beautiful.
down a little further. So I just want to skip around a little bit.
Oh, sure.
If you go down past, okay, so let's stop here. These are called the highlight boxes. So we get into a little bit more details, right? Jewish diversity, why Zionism, Gaza explained, October 7th genocide. If you go down to the second, minorities, we talk about the minorities in Israel. It's not just Jews who live there. The correct terms and Israel fast facts. Let's say you're appearing on a TV show or you have a class presentation. You have 5 minutes to educate yourself on something related to Israel. These are the fast facts, making it as
Beautiful.
user accessible as possible. And then to finish off, if you scroll down from there, we have TBTN approved books. These are really good articles that I did not write. These are external articles, some videos. And then up on the tippy top of the page, there's a section called TBTN in the media. So you can see past podcasts, speaking
Mhm.
engagements, articles that have been written. So very comprehensive, user friendly. Um,
Wonderful.
yeah.
That's so incredible. I really encourage people to check out the website. Where can they follow you on social media?
Yeah, so Instagram when my account is not being targeted by Zionist. So I'm on my fourth one. So now it's called Zionism underscore taking back the narrative.
Okay.
LinkedIn, surprisingly, very active
Mhm.
with posts about Israel. So definitely do not be afraid to post on there. You can follow me there. Um, X, not so engaged at the moment, but maybe I will be in the near future again. Well, only
Wonderful.
so many things I can juggle along with my program associate.
Of course. Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I
Thank
wish
you.
we could talk for hours because I always want to ask you more and be like, well, what about this? And what about this period in history? And you just are able to rattle off these important facts. So thank you for sharing that with everyone. I also look forward to our continued collaboration between Ricky and Taking Back the Narrative. I think that there's so much overlap in our missions. And I think we really need to keep carrying this torch of Zionism education, accurate Zionism education going forward. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much. It's truly an honor, and I am just thrilled to be part of this collaboration. And again, I'm just so impressed by the activism. And you can ask anyone I've talked to in the past week, Ricky, Ricky, Ricky. So,
Amazing.
yeah,
Thanks so much, Laureen.
yeah.
Thank
Okay, we'll
you.
talk
Take
soon. Thank
care.
you so
Talk to
much.
you soon.
Bye.
Bye.